Today's gospel reading, it is from the Gospel of Luke. It is from Jesus' final discourse in the Gospel of Luke. A final discourse, what's that, you may be wondering? Well, let me tell you. It is what a person says to the people close to them before they die. You may be thinking, well, that's a last will and testament. No, this is very different. A last will and testament or a trust in the United States, where economics is the focal social institution, we disperse goods when somebody dies. This happens before a person dies. In the ancient Mediterranean, the world, kinship was focal. And so last words were given before the person died. It was believed that a person close to death was prescient. They could see what was happening in the future after they're gone. So they want to impart significant information about what's going to happen, about what may befall the group that they are connected to in general, and individuals in the group in particular. They give advice, how to stay together, what to keep an eye out for. And final discourses in the Bible borrow language from astronomy and astrology of the time. So for ancient cultures, the connection between celestial movements and earthly events was understood to be causal. The sun rises, this happens. The star goes across the sky, this happens. It's very causal. And you'll hear that in today's reading. The Gospel of Luke, chapter 21, verses 25 through 36. There will be signs in the sun, the moon, and the stars, and on earth distress among nations, confused by the roaring of the sea and the waves. People will faint from fear and foreboding of what is coming upon the world, for the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. Now, when these things begin to take place, stand up, raise your heads, because your redemption is drawing near. Then he told them a parable. Look at the fig tree and all the trees. As soon as they sprout leaves, you can see for yourself and know that summer is near, already near. So also when you see these things taking place, you know that the kingdom of God is near. Truly I tell you, this generation will not pass away until all things have taken place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. Be on guard, so that your hearts are not weighed down with dissipation and drunkenness and the worries of this life, and that day catch you unexpectedly like a trap. For it will come upon all who live on the face of the whole earth. Be alert at all times, praying that you may have the strength to escape all these things that will take place and to stand before the Son of Man. It was a beautiful fall day in the Eastern Sierra. The sun was warm, the air was crisp. Mike and I had gone on a hike along with Daisy, our dog, or Daisy Dog as we like to call her, and we'd stopped at a location and rested at this saddle, looking at the magnificence of it all, the dog smelling all of a million smells, until finally she sat down next to us, three of us in the dirt, sitting up against a granite boulder. It was heaven on earth. When Mike quietly said to me, "There's a coyote." And in the split second between his words and the dog seeing her cousin, I threw my body around her and kept her from lurching forward. Mike eventually got the leash reattached to her collar, but her interest only grew, as did that of this young coyote, who was very healthy. Looked like it had been a really good summer for this coyote. Even a few rocks didn't faze it because I don't think it was new to be scared of people quite yet. Fortunately, we were able to shoo it away, and we were on our way, dog on leash, when out of the corner of my eye, 30 feet or so away, there it was again, walking along beside us and followed us for about a quarter of a mile or so. I stayed rather alert, very alert, for that quarter mile, looking back, wondering where it was, and it occurred to me that this is the posture of Advent. Yeah. Of waiting in an awake, alert manner, posture. We are invited in this season to wait, not passively, like when we're in line somewhere or waiting for the tires to get rotated, or in an office where there are a bunch of old magazines. No, it's the kind of wait, that's the kind of wait where we try to distract ourselves. But Advent isn't a waiting where we try to distract ourselves by playing a game on our phone or listening to a podcast or avoiding talking to that other person in the waiting room who's trying to get everybody else into conversation. Advent is an invitation to actively wait by staying awake, staying alert to the signs of Christ's coming. And for the early Christians, they were anticipating the actual physical return of Christ any day. And when Jesus did not return like they expected, they had to come up with reasons and explanations and theories, and lots of different theories and doctrines have arisen over the last 2,000 years. Some of them quite, let's just say, interesting. It was thought, and it is still thought by an unbelievable number of Christians, that Jesus is returning to judge the earth, make everything right. Of course, what one group thinks is right may not be what some other group thinks is right. Christians have been reading the tea leaves of time ever since. Another distraction, I'd say, from actively waiting. Like people are saying, well, what can I do while I'm waiting so I don't really have to pay attention to Jesus here and now? This text is apocalyptic, which means it reveals something. That's all it means, apocalyptic. It does not mean mayhem, destruction, devastation like the movies would tell you. No. Apocalypse means unhiding, to reveal. Something is hidden, and it will be revealed. Ta-da! Yeah, just that simple. Ancient writers tried to imagine how they would know when something they believed was going to happen was actually going to happen and when it was happening. So they did this by writing about the usual portents of Revelation, the tropes that were utilized by other religions. It's all going to go badly. Then the hero will sweep in and save the day. Ta-da! Remember that part from the text today? He said, people will faint from fear and foreboding of what is coming upon the world, for the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and glory. The heroes arrived. Yay! Now when these things begin to take place, stand up, raise your heads, because your redemption is drawing near. Isn't that hopeful? Your redemption is drawing near. You know, the purpose of these texts wasn't to scare the bejesus out of people. It was to encourage them, to give them and us a sense of hope. Your redemption is near. Pay attention. Stay alert so you can see it when it comes. It's basic foundational necessity for a living faith is paying attention. It's Spiritual Formation 101, paying attention. It is incredibly puzzling how many people prefer to not wake up to what is happening around them. They seem to prefer to be anesthetized by falsely held narratives than to wake up to the stories of suffering that make them uncomfortable and defensive. The planet suffering, people suffering. Even Christian leaders these days talk about being woke in very pejorative ways, looking down their nose. Why is it that when people are afraid of something, don't understand it, or don't want to face change, they scoff at it? They express disdain. They're pejorative and derogatory. No curiosity. It's just kind of pushing it away. Well, I'll tell you why. It's because they are afraid. They may not know they are, but they are. They don't understand, or they don't want to understand, or both. And they don't want to face the change that will come and that definitely is coming. Things are always changing. There are school districts removing the autobiography of Frederick Douglass from their libraries and curricula. When I read that, I'm just like, what? I can't believe this. Believe it, Julie. Parents, and let's be fair, white parents are so afraid that their children are so fragile that learning about the actual history of our country will damage them. Wow, talk about a helicopter parent. What about the generational damage done to black children and their parents denied an equal education and who only have learned in the most textbooks that their ancestors were slaves? Oh, they were slaves. That's it. Oh my gosh, let's give people Frederick Douglass and Ida B. Wells and Harriet Tubman. My gosh. Did you know, I didn't know this, that 1 out of every 4 cowboys was black? You don't know that because it's not in any of the westerns you watched on television. Did you know that the Bruce family, a black family in Manhattan Beach, started a beachfront resort for the black community because they weren't allowed to go to the white resorts? And they started their beach resort, beachfront property, people, same time as the Marriotts and the Hiltons. The city decided they wanted that property, so by eminent domain, they paid a pittance for it and said, we need that for a park. Guess how long it took them to build the park? It's not built. It was never built. And thanks to some descendants of the Bruce family and their tenacity, just recently, that property was returned to them. And imagine what would be different about the Bruce family had they been allowed the same right, not privilege, the same right, maybe privilege, as the Marriotts and the Hiltons. Our own disciples' tradition, fraught with the stories, weren't in my disciples' history book in seminary, let me tell you. In Washington State and Indiana, the Ku Klux Klan was quite active. Elders in disciples' churches were active members in the Ku Klux Klan. My friend Arlene grew up in Mooresville, Indiana, and she distinctly remembers the relationship between the church and the Ku Klux Klan. She was awake to it because she had overheard the gospel of Jesus, of that ancient Jesus. She overheard the gospel. But I'll tell you, most of the rest of her family haven't woken up. And there are communities like that still, where people continue to be formed, misinformed, and deformed by a false narrative, an incomplete story. There is also a law recently put into place in the great state of Texas that I think they realize needs some fixing. Requires you need to teach both sides of an issue as if they're equivalent. like the Holocaust. Yeah. Oh, you have to teach both sides of the Holocaust. No, there are no both sides of the Holocaust. It was evil. It was a moral evil. Slavery is a moral evil. They both need to be taught as such, period. Rabbi Abraham Heschel said this about the Holocaust and racism in the United States. Few are guilty, all are responsible. I don't know if my ancestors held slaves. I know some of them are from the Dakotas in Indiana, so I'm wondering about their views. I may not have been guilty individually, but I am responsible. And Christians, I'm talking to you Christians, we are called to keep awake to our responsibility as people who follow Jesus, to see the suffering and respond to it with compassion and humility. Healing is not painless. Any of us who've had surgery know it's not painless. That's why they give us painkillers. But we cannot anesthetize ourselves to the suffering of others. My experience says that physical, emotional, and spiritual healing takes people through seasons and pastures of pain. Why do people resist being even aware, let alone alert to the myriads of stories that are part of our nation's history, our church history? Why do we want to sweep them under the proverbial rug? It just means we have more to trip over. Maybe it's time to clean things out and look at what we've swept under. The signs of Christ coming, I believe, can be seen today. And they are found in the places where people are waking up to the generational suffering ignored by our country's false narrative of itself. Any psychologist worth their salt will tell you a false narrative of self is a sign of mental distress. The signs of Christ's coming are people recognizing the need to tell the whole story. The signs of Christ's coming are in every kind and compassionate and humble listening to the suffering that longs to be healed. Pay attention, be alert to it. Remember how Jesus came into this world, and who did he go to? The people who were suffering, people who needed healing came to him, and he listened. He humbly listened and offered himself. Advent invites us to wake up and to wait alertly. Advent invites us to pay attention. Look at our world and our own life with the eyes, through the understanding of God. That's what Jesus comes for, to teach us how to see with the eyes of divine compassion, to join God in knowing the world and the people in it as God knows them to be. And I believe before we can fully even do that, there's a bigger question we need to ask ourselves. Can I join God in knowing who God knows me to be? Can I join God in knowing who God knows me to be? And that's not about seeing ourselves as great and everyone else is not. That would be called narcissism. So how can I know? What are the signs that I know I am joining God in knowing who God knows me to be? These are the signs. The signs are that I am beginning to see in everyone else who God knows them to be. Even the people, especially the people who cling to conspiracies, who cling to false narratives as their flotation device in the storm of life. Because they're afraid. They're afraid. The more we know ourselves as beloved of God, the more we grow in seeing other people as beloved of God. It's like when Thomas Merton, on that corner, that busy street corner, he tells this story of seeing all these people and suddenly feeling intimately connected to each one of them, and they to each other, and God being in the midst of it all. What a sweet communion. Keep alert to the true signs of Christ's coming. Keep alert, not to conspiracy, but to compassion. That is where you will find Christ. Pay attention to the true signs of Christ's presence always with us. Keep alert, not to judgment, but to justice. Not to fear, but to forgiveness. Not to laws, but to love. To the love that is pleading with us, pleading with all of us, to be born in us, to be born in you. Amen.